Welcome to Resilience Talk, hosted by Paul Spencer of Second Nature Solutions. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Resilient Talk podcast. We have not had an episode in quite a while, taking a little bit of a break, but I am so glad that we're back, Paul, because your work in building resilient businesses arguably has never been more important than right now, because we are experiencing what you're calling an age of transition. We are going from one era to another, and in between those two eras is a lot of uncertainty. And I think something that is very pointed, a particular within that universal, is the tariff situation, where it's causing a lot of uncertainty. But as you had mentioned when we were talking before recording the episode, that the tariff situation is a strategy against a backdrop of these macro forces that are affecting businesses, economies, immigration, geopolitical tensions. There's so much, even technological changes, the way that companies are adopting AI, the way that they're building their supply chains. There's just so much going on because of these giant macro forces that we're going to get into. And so you have written an article about this age of transition to help businesses become more resilient to handle these uncertainties. And so I want to hear from you. What started this article? What gave rise to you sitting down, pen and paper, and thinking about these things? And then we'll get into some of the things that you mentioned in this, especially these two big shifts that are occurring right now. So
Yeah.
what started you talking about this?
Yeah. Well, I saw a clip of RFK Jr. I think it was in a cabinet meeting, and he was talking about the SNAP program. And then he used the phrase, "the soda industry is knocking on my door." And the gist of it is that he wants to change the SNAP program to be more nutritious, right? To be better food, better source of food for students. And what I gathered from the clip is that the soda industry is making an argument that, well, nutrition is not part of it; it's just part of a food program. And then he made the quip that, well, it's called the Student Nutrition Assistance Program, and kind of made me chuckle a little bit, because you can see in the back room that that the soda industry is saying, "Geez, we got this huge account, right? It's seamless. There's hardly any friction here. It just renews over and over and over again. It's through the entire United States. It's just good money, right?" And now we're getting something that's happening that's jeopardizing this big account. And so this happens a lot in our businesses, where something changes or something shifts, either within our market or maybe even the macro side of things are shifting. And now some of our well-known primary customers are coming back to us, and they're saying, "Hey, can we cut costs? Hey, can we get a little bit more? Hey, can we pause, right? Can we do some of those things?" And you're saying, "Geez, these are our top 5 customers. If we lose them, right, you kind of hit the panic button, and you say, if we lose them, just like the soda industry, if we lose this account, what's that going to do for us, right?" And so what comes to mind just in that example is we are in this age of transition. And this one's pretty specific, and it's more of a government shift rather than maybe a macro shift, where the government at a stroke of a pen can change regulations and say we're going to do this and not do that, and everybody kind of whipsawed with that. And that's the risk of having government accounts, right?
Yeah.
But we also have this reality where things are in transition, like you described, with the tariffs and with trade and with everything else. And so when we know that we have our top 5, meaning customers, hopefully we have a diverse client list, right? We don't have one customer or 2, we have at least 5. right?
Hopefully,
Uh,
yes.
but we likely have the audience that's listening to this are mature companies have been around for 30, 50 years, right? So you have a good client base. And part of that risk management is making sure that you have a diversified client base, right? But we also know that our top five customers provide a good chunk of our annual
Yeah.
revenue, right?
Mm-hmm.
30%, maybe even more than that,
Mm-hmm.
which is okay. Um, and that provides an opportunity. Sometimes it provides some vulnerability. And we just need to be able to ask ourselves, again, using this RFK Jr. example, that if something changes within our top five, and let's just say we lose one of our top five, they're just gone for whatever reason. A resilient business tends to say, um, not ideal. You know, I wouldn't wish that to happen. I don't want it to happen. Um, and it's going to push up against different aspects of our business, right? But in the end, it's not the end of the world for us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we'll be able to adjust, and we'll likely just be able to recoup everything at a point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why we're able to say that is not because we put our head in the sand and we're just ignoring the problem and we're just being naive about it. It's because we have a resilient business. And a resilient business means that I have confidence and it's been demonstrated that I have a system on the sales side that it's an engine, right? And it runs. And I have confidence that yeah, we lose a big account, but that engine is still running and I
Mm-hmm.
know that it can produce, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is a sign of resiliency regardless of what's happening around us, right? And then I also know that within my delivery side, my delivery engine is also running very well. And when something happens, with a customer or some kind of other imposed input, I know that they're also capable of adjusting and switching things out and pivoting, and then we'll be fine, right? Again, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be painless, but we can get through it, right? As opposed to somebody who is in a what I would call a traditional business, who's not really thinking about these things and just kind of goes about their business. This would absorb all of the oxygen in
Mm-hmm.
the room for their entire business for the next, I don't know, year and a half, right? And it may throw them so far off course that it may jeopardize the business itself, right? They can't think, they can't sleep, they can't do anything else but try to consider why did we lose that account? How do we get that account back? Right? All those things, and they can't recover because they don't have resilient systems.
You're saying that, yeah, that's a business without a system is one
Yeah,
that is going to
yeah,
be, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's more ad hoc.
Mm-hmm.
And every business has a process or a system, but a lot of times it's invisible and it's not transparent, right? And nobody can look at it because it's in Paul's head.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes down to it, Paul's head cannot run the business
That's right.
when things are shifting, right? When you're in
That's
this
right.
age of transition.
That's right. That's right. You used a phrase you called imposed input.
Mm-hmm.
Can you define that or describe that and then talk about these two major imposed inputs that you see businesses facing now, but especially in the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, sure. So imposed inputs is something that I learned from Deming and System of Profound Knowledge. So when we're mapping out systems or processes and we're being aware of those, um, you have inputs into your system, right?
Mm,
So if we're building furniture, right, you have lumber, you have hardware like the screws and the metal pieces that are coming in, right? The knobs, right? Those are all inputs, and you get to choose those. You get to choose what type of wood, right? Which type of material. An imposed input is something that you don't have any you can't opt out of, right?
mm,
It's non-negotiable, right? And so that could be things like the economy. You might be in a recession. You might have the ash borer bug, right? Who goes through and eats up all the ash trees, and now you don't
yes,
have
yes,
any
yes.
ash trees anymore, right? Or the cost of ash trees are through the roof, and now we
Yeah.
got to use different wood, even though that's not our preferred wood. That's
Hmm.
imposed. There's nothing you can do about that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so an imposed input is just we live in that always, and it's important to map that out. Sometimes some business leaders think it's a little too much into the weeds to think about what those are and actually write them down.
Mm.
But when we have core processes, systems in our business, it is helpful to understand the difference between what's chosen, meaning what are the things that we have control over, and what are the ones that are imposed. And when we have a clear understanding of what's imposed, I mean, you, Brandon, you and I may say that's imposed, and then as we talk about it, we agree that we actually have more control of that than we thought,
Mm.
and we move it up, right,
Mm.
into a chosen. And what that does is that changes how our process actually works,
Hmm.
right? And so if we want to do process improvement or we want to be resilient, and we can't change uh, the ash tree deficit, then we may update or change our processes to be able to handle different types of wood materials, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is a resilient business. It's really difficult to be able to handle that if you don't have eyes on sight, right?
Mm.
An awareness on what your imposed inputs are.
Interesting. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So things you can control and things you can't control. And the
Mm-hmm.
things you can't control are inputs that are imposed. You have
Yeah,
to
they're
deal with them
imposed.
as they are. They
Yeah.
are, this is the facts of the case. You can't get out of it.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some imposed inputs uh, can be over time moved to chosen.
Okay. That's helpful. Okay. I like that.
So let's take weather, right? Let's say we're a home builder, a
Hmm.
residential home builder, and we're let's say in Florida, and it rains a lot, and it's hard to build quality houses the way we like to build them because it rains a lot. Well, we can't change the weather, but maybe we say we're not going to do business in Florida. We're going to do it in uh, Phoenix, right? In
Which is
Arizona.
happening, by the way. Insurers are saying that. They're like, hey, we're not going to insure your property in
Oh yeah,
Florida
that's
or
a great
California or
example.
whatever.
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
then what you're doing is you're adjusting, you're instead of just dealing with it, right?
Yeah.
You're adjusting it and making it a chosen input. And
I
you're
like that.
changing your
Mm.
business model because of some of the imposed inputs, which essentially are constraints,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Around your business. Another example is the government, right?
Yeah.
The government may have a regulation, may have some way of doing something, and then you may lobby your congressperson, right, about this as a small business, and they may help you change a law or get a law passed, which helps, or get rid of a regulation or add a regulation, which helps the business environment and move an imposed input up
Mm.
into chosen.
Mm. That's
So
really
those are
helpful.
some examples.
Okay. Okay. But you've got two big ones that you reference in the article and are kind of guiding your thinking now in this next era that we're entering into. So talk to me about these two. I don't want to give them away. So tell me what the two major
Yeah.
shifts or imposed inputs in this coming era that we're facing now.
Yeah, so we're in this. So if you think about, if everybody's heard of Neil Howe and The Fourth Turning, recommend you read that book. It's a thick book. I think it's very interesting, so it's a quick read for me. Uh, but maybe you could listen to it twice speed on audio if you're not
Okay.
much
Yeah.
of a
I'll write
reader.
down the Audible one.
Anyway, so he's got. It's a very. I think it's super interesting to think about the generations and the four generations and how they turn. And so we're in that fourth generation, which in his model, which I think is actually proving itself out even today, we're
Hmm.
living it, is that when you experience that fourth generation, which is four generations living when they're all living together, right? They're all alive at the same time and coming of age at the same time. Is that on that fourth one is when you have more of a chaotic environment, right?
Mm.
It's more of a crisis.
Mm.
And all the things that were built prior generations, as far as maybe the government or the institutions, or maybe even could be even values, religious values or non-religious values, or whatever those things are that grew this society or this civilization, are no longer relevant or no longer really working, either because they are not relevant or because they become so stale and so abused that they no longer work,
Mm.
right? And so people, it becomes a very chaotic environment, and that's his theory. That's where we are today, And so the environment that we're in is we have a demographic shift.
Mm.
So we have the boomer generation that's coming out of age, right? And so the next biggest generation is the millennial generation. And so what's happening is uh, throughout the entire world, that boomer generation is leaving the earth, right? Leaving
It's a
the earth.
great way to put it. Yes,
And
correct.
so what we're experiencing is a loss in population
Mm-hmm.
in the developed world,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so with that, that means that we are going to have issues. It's going to be harder to produce, right? It's going to be harder to have certain living standards if you're not able to produce. And there are some countries that are falling off the cliff, right? You can just look these things up.
Mm.
But some countries, Europe, China, right? They're off the cliff. So, meaning they will lose a lot of population, a lot of productivity power
Mm.
over the coming however many years, right? Decades.
Mm-hmm.
The US is just barely under reproducing, but we also have a immigration lever that we can pull, right? People want to come here. And so anyway, that's changing the world and it's changing how things are gonna go, right?
Mm-hmm.
The second one is that the global trade pattern that we've had is also slowly, or maybe from your perspective today, is quickly disintegrating,
Mm-hmm.
and it's shifting and it's becoming more of a regional economy, more of a let's have you and me, Brandon, let's you and I trade and make a deal, and using Trump's words, right? Make a deal, and then let's you and I make a deal, and then we become friends, and the whole regional type economy is seems to be where we're going, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that is, it's a mix of things. It's a mix of lots of things, mostly around the difference between U.S. and China as part of
Yeah.
powers, right? That be, but also because the U.S. has been funding the Navy, the world's Navy, and keeping open channels, trade channels, shipping channels open. We've had a really long peacetime. And
Mm.
so it's been easy to ship things from across the world, across lots of different countries, make something, make one piece in Asia, another piece in Africa, another piece in Europe, and then assemble it in Mexico. And
Yeah.
the only reason that's possible is because the shipping lanes are open.
Mm.
And we're seeing that with the Houthis, right? And
Mm-hmm.
disrupting shipping channels and trade channels, right? And so now they're having to go around Africa instead of the
Mm.
shortest route, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which increase costs. But then
Mm-hmm.
you start to multiply that out in different areas, and it's very fragile,
Feels
right?
that way. Yeah.
The supply chain, the global supply chain, can unravel fairly quickly,
Yeah.
right? If you get more of disruptions in the regions, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, there's lots of different things like that that are occurring. And the other one too is the U.S. Has a debt issue,
Yeah.
and so it's the idea of subsidizing the world's military, right, the Navy, and keeping everything going and funding wars and keeping the peace is running out of runway because it can't
Yeah.
be afforded anymore.
Yeah.
And so just by cutting that in half, or maybe even a quarter, jeopardizes different trade routes,
Mm.
naval trade routes, ocean trade routes,
Mm.
and then that's why we're going into more of a regional economy.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are things that are imposed inputs. None of us are going to change that. Those things are occurring, and then so again, we have to ask ourselves, how does that affect us, if at all? Some of us are more insulated to that than others, right? And there's no use on getting stuck into the nitty gritty of daily kind of media and whatever's going on with the White House, and the trades are on, trades are off, and the stocks are down, stocks are up. None of it is really relevant for the macro side of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The macro side, these things are moving And it doesn't matter who's president or what's going on, these things are going to occur.
Mm,
It's just a matter of, are they going to occur more slowly? Like we have an opportunity to kind of play with it, right? Just like what we would say with my customers, right? Let's play with that. Let's
mm,
experiment with that theory, run a PDSA and see what happens.
mm,
So we have an opportunity to do that, as opposed to reaching a critical mass in, say, sometime less than 10 years, six,
mm,
7, 8 years, where it has to be more draconian
mm,
changes.
mm.
We may get there anyway, but who knows? That part, I'm not really concerned about that as part of this talk. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
being aware that these things are happening. They're imposed inputs. There's nothing we can do about them. We can be educated about them and aware about them, but in the end, it's the weather, right?
Mm,
And so we run business in Florida. So how do our processes, how do our businesses work, knowing that it's going to rain?
mm. So you just put out a lot of ideas out there. So I want to recap really quickly and see if I'm summarizing these accurately. Because by the way, when we talk about macro topics, especially like macroeconomics and things, and trying to forecast the future, nobody knows what the future is going to hold.
Yeah.
But there are frameworks and there are big tectonic plates that are moving, and you can see them, and there are likely implications. We just don't know exactly how they'll
No,
play
you're
out.
not. Yeah.
But I like the
Yes.
framework that you're putting together. That's very
Yeah.
helpful to
Actually,
understand.
on that, Brandon, we got, so one of the things that we've talked about before, with some of the videos is optimal, right? So if we look at the way to get to optimal, it's a series of feedback loops,
Right.
small
Yeah.
feedback loops, right? And
Yeah.
so even in the best of times when it's sunny out and we're we're doing our business, we're always striving to get to optimal, and the only way to get to optimal is short feedback loops, and
Mm,
we cannot predict what optimal is ever
mm.
until we get there and we say, yeah, good enough. But you have to have the feedback loops.
Until the next feedback loop that tells you it's
Yeah,
not
you're
optimal and
always
you got to
doing it.
fix it.
Yeah,
Right.
you're never going to stop.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
because
so
everything around us is always shifting.
right. It's yeah,
Nothing is
nothing
static.
nothing is static.
Yeah.
So you've got these series of generational shifts that occur.
Yep.
So if I had to just pick a point in history, printing press came out.
Yeah.
The 4 generations later, you had the Reformation pick up. Four
Yeah.
generations later, you had the colonial expansion and the age of exploration.
Mm-hmm.
4 generations later, you had the Enlightenment. 4 generations after that, you had the Industrial Revolution. 4 generations after that, you had World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are, 4 generations later, with COVID and a lot of global
Mm-hmm.
tensions and even local national tensions and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the one
So going
actually in
through this period.
between there is the Civil War. So World War
Yeah,
II
right.
and then Civil War. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right,
which actually
right.
is very fascinating to me because the Fourth Turning book, the Neil Howe book, again, is just a theory, and he lays it out. But unless you're in that kind of crisis period, which according to his theory, we are in that crisis
Mm,
theory, and you're actually living it, it's really hard to be able to say whether that's true or not,
mm,
right? His
mm,
theories. I
mm.
mean, they line up and it's history. But when you're observing it in real time, it's very, I don't know, to me, it's very fascinating.
Yeah. Because 4 generations before the printing press was the Black Plague and the fall of Constantinople, and then 4 generations before that was the ending of the medieval, period and moving into a new era. I mean, now, of course, this is just in the West, and I'm sure every
Yeah. This
region
is from a Western
just
perspective. Yeah.
just has, they have their
Yeah.
four turnings as well. But I love the idea that there are these kind of moments in history that you can track and build a story out of that does seem to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, given all of that, the era that we're in now is you have these two big shifts of demographic shifts that a lot of their replacement rate or population growth rate is not quite keeping up with with the replacement rate with
Yeah.
deaths to
Yep.
birth
Mm-hmm.
ratio.
Yes.
And then you've also got this what was a global economy, global trade, and offshoring, and NAFTA, and all these
Yeah.
kind of things like
Yeah.
this.
Highly integrated, highly
Now,
specific, highly integrated, meaning factories were just building one tiny chip,
right,
and then other factories are just building the casing, right?
Right.
Other factories are building the Wi-Fi, and they're going all those raw materials are going all over the world to build all different places to build those different components. They're all being shipped into one place to be assembled.
Yep.
It's fascinating the way that, I mean, we've been living that.
Yep.
And it's very unique because we've never experienced that in the world, right? We've never had enough peace to be able to, right? You might say maybe the what's the Silk Road, right?
The Silk Road. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like those kinds of things. But yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Well, the height of that was, Milton Friedman in the 80s and 90s with this kind of free trade and a lot
Yeah,
of, which I'm a fan of Friedman. I think he had a lot of great things to say. But then 4 generations before that, you had Henry Ford, where everything was a,
yeah,
complete integrated supply chain. He built,
yes, it was an
giant Red
integrated.
River
Yes,
factory in
yes,
Michigan to do all
yeah,
that. So yeah, it's
yeah,
it's it's funny how those things kind of
yeah.
turn
I
out.
think my theory, and this is again, uh, the reason why we even started this podcast and the whole newsletter when we did that in 23 was around these things, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But my theory is that things are going to become more and more localized, right? Just like what you said with Henry Ford,
yeah.
we're gonna realize that the uncertainty is too great,
Mm,
meaning from a cost perspective or maybe even from a risk perspective. And so we're going to start to condense, right, which is that imposed input going from
yeah.
global to regional, and things will get closer,
Mm.
meaning the sourcing of materials and how we build things and where we buy things will become closer. We'll see if that plays out, but that's the way things are moving.
So if this theory is true, which there's a lot of evidence to say that it is, what do we do about it? You know, I
Uh,
mean, where do we go from here? And we're running out of time. I
yeah,
feel
no,
like,
yeah, I don't,
but
well,
there's but you've got in this article, you've got some steps that we can
yeah,
take.
yeah.
So I want to, yeah, I want to hear your
Yeah.
thoughts
So I
on
think
where we
I
can
think
go.
it's to be clear, we're not going to do anything about it. It
Oh yeah, fair,
the
right, yes,
tidal
right.
wave is coming, and that's just the way the world
Yes,
works.
yes, yes. But you can
So
take an active approach to that tidal wave that's coming. You
yeah, you
can get
can yeah you
an
can be
umbrella of
proactive,
some.
right?
Yeah.
Uh, and and I think this is also important too, just to keep in mind is this is also from Neil Howe's book, which he kind of just points out that most people are thinking about everything that we're talking about from the lens of political sides
Yes,
of
right.
whether is blue right, or the Democrats right, or are the Republicans right? Is
Hmm.
is Biden right, or is Trump right? And what he says is that's the wrong
Hmm.
question, right?
Hmm.
The most important question that he talks about is, are we prepared as Americans, right, to deal with, and he uses this word, the trauma,
Mm.
right, to be able to go through an era that will collapse. He uses
Mm.
that word too. This 80-year generational pattern that will collapse, and another one will emerge. Kind of to your
Mm.
point is we don't even know what that's going to be. But the time that crisis, at least using his words, right, that crisis period is traumatic and it collapses,
Mm.
right? So I think that is something to be aware of. That instead of thinking about how could I change this, or maybe who do I vote for? I mean, you can still do those things, but these things are, regardless, this thing is going to happen. So how do we build a resilient business,
Mm.
right? And all of that is just based on risk management,
Mm.
right? And thinking about um, how do you analyze your customers, which ones are at risk,
Mm.
which ones aren't, which ones should we double down on, which areas of the industry should we go after next, because we feel we're predicting, right? We have a theory that they are more secure or less risk given all the inputs that we have, right? So the input being that rain, where can we go that we can build more, we can do the things that we want to do and not have the
Mhm.
weather, right?
Mhm.
Where can we go where we don't have the trade issues, or where can we go
Mhm.
that the demographics aren't as risky, right, or as impactful? And maybe there's not anything you can do about that, so you just do better for worse, right?
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. So you're thinking about risk management. You're wanting to kind of play those scenarios out. And most people that I work with know that I like to do the rehearsals, right? So we rehearse those scenarios and we say, all right, we get different departments in the room and we say, all right, customer X is no longer with us, right? What do we do? And we rehearse it and we play it out and we just kind of mock it up, right? And what that does is that gives us that's a short feedback loop that we can do in a half day or a 2 hour or 1 hour. And what it does is it gives us some learnings about gaps in our processes, gaps in our understanding, and maybe some assumptions that we make about our own business that are incorrect, right? And so
Yeah.
what those do is that gives us an opportunity to say, oh, maybe we should shore that up. Maybe we should improve that system. Maybe we should think a little differently about our customer base. Maybe we should go talk to our customers because we're assuming this, but we're actually not sure that that's correct. Let's go ask them, right? Which is all okay to do, right? And then as we go through that, we're thinking about our systems, our processes. We iterate, right? We run PDSAs, and we're doing this always, all the time anyway. This is how our business should run. This is taking it at a more strategic level, and it's saying, let's run a risk management process, which is just what I just described, and we're constantly thinking about where are risks. We prioritize those risks, and then we run scenarios.
Okay. Okay. I have so much more to say. Okay. So the way that you phrase this is vulnerability landscape, future scenarios, mapping those out, designing resilient systems around that, testing through small experiments,
Yep.
PDSA loops, things like that,
Yes.
and then finding that balance to achieve optimal. So those are the kind of steps that you take to
Yeah. And
see these inputs come in this tidal wave that's coming at you.
yeah, exactly. And then as an owner, or I mean, even as an executive leader, you can put a team together, which doesn't have to be executives. It can be anybody in your organization that has different perspectives, different seniority, meaning somebody who's new to the company versus somebody who's been there for 30 years. And you put a team of 3 or 4 together, you have them listen to this podcast, and you say, figure some things out, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
then let's get back next week and run some scenarios.
yeah, yep, yep, cool.
Um,
Yeah,
this is this here. This is, I think, this is the main thing of all this. And thinking about the soda industry and losing their Snap account and all of that, is just insight into us that we don't have to panic, and there are no guarantees, right?
sure,
There are
sure.
no guarantees, but if we are methodical and we are mature in how we run our business, we can handle a lot,
Yeah,
a lot, a
yeah,
lot of imposed inputs and a lot of transition,
yeah.
and we'll come out the other side stronger.
If I could summarize it in one word, it would be systematic. Think systemically about your business and the world that you're in, and that alone will start to make your business more resilient to face these
Yeah,
challenges.
that's right.
Yeah,
Which I'll translate that was, if I'm systematic in my thinking, that means that I've developed a process that runs every quarter where I have the 4 people who are my risk management team, and they have a clear, visible, transparent risk management process that we've developed together, and they run it. That is systematic. That's systematic thinking.
okay.
And I have confidence as the owner that when something like this is happening and I'm getting this tariff update, I know that I have a process that's running, that's thinking about these things. And if I have a question, I go ask the team, or I may even be on the team, right? And I can go say, "Have you thought about this?" And they say, "Yeah, we thought about that, and
Yeah,
this is what we arrived to." Or, "No, we haven't. We'll put that in our process, and we'll run it next meeting." And I'm like, "Good, thanks," right? And that's calm, peace of mind,
calm,
running the business.
calm. Can you
I'm
imagine
not
running a
tampering.
calm business?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
sounds
A lot of
wonderful.
times owners hear the noise and then they tamper, right? And then they say, "Go work on this," but there's no process in place, and now they're scrambling, they're doing all kinds of stuff, and that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't have a lasting effect.
That resonates.
That's a traditional business, by the way.
That is very helpful to think about the systematic processes. But I hope that listeners were taking notes because there was a lot of big ideas, but also getting more concrete into the systematic processes. But what I want to do is I want to try to recap this article in a newsletter, and we can send that out to the community. So if you're listening to this, please go to secondnature.solutions and sign up for our newsletter, and you'll receive a 7-day kind of onboarding experience working through the main foundational principles of second nature. And as part of that, you'll receive newsletters as the show comes out. And so I would like to put this article that you wrote, partially in that newsletter for the community. So please go sign up. As always, like and subscribe. And Paul, we will see you next time. Thank you so much for your insight and wisdom as always.
Yeah, so much fun.
See you.
Bye.